and you should be good to go, Cynthia.
Wonderful. Okay, welcome to the BAC PAC for June 2023 Bicycle Advisory Committee and the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. We are going to skip introductions given the limited time, but if you do speak, please introduce yourself as you begin. And my name is Cynthia Palmer. There's a little feedback, so let's all mute if we're not speaking. My name is Cynthia Palmer. I'm the chair of the Bicycle Advisory Committee, and I don't know if Lizzie is here. She is the chair of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. No sign of Lizzie. That's all right. Let's get started. And our first speaker will be Brett Wallace, who will talk for a few minutes on the future of outdoor dining. Thank you so much, Brett.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Brett Wallace. I'm with Arlington County Planning Division. I'm here this evening to give an update on the future of outdoor dining study or the food study. I'm just going to turn my camera off while I'm presenting to save some bandwidth here, but I'll try and get through this pretty briefly. I do have a lot of slides to get through. Just starting with the study purpose and goals, the study schedule, looking at some existing regulations and guidelines. Excuse me, providing a background of outdoor cafes and the temporary outdoor seating areas, or TOSAs. Quick overview of community engagement, and then preliminary recommendations and next steps. So we kicked off this study last fall, and the county manager removed the emergency order. We launched the study. We launched phase 1 of the study. We did a lot of information gathering, reviewing the temporary outdoor seating areas, or the TOSAs, to see what's working and what's not working great. We had some community engagement. We received a lot of responses in the fall, and we hosted a couple of virtual roundtable events. We're now in this transitional phase between phase 2 and phase 3, where we've kind of taken the findings from phase 1 to inform recommendations going forward that we'll be bringing to the county board next month. So we are currently in the process of meeting with several commissions and to review potential zoning ordinance amendments and updates to the outdoor cafe guidelines. We're looking at a request to advertise to the county board next week at the recess meeting on June 13th, I believe, and then for Planning Commission and County Board action in July. And just to note that the TOSA program that supported these temporary outdoor seating areas will be ending on August the 15th. And so we're hoping to have new regulations in place for restaurants to begin the application process to the new permanent outdoor cafe guidelines. So again, one of the main purposes of the study was to look at what's working with the TOSA program and what could be incorporated into the 2 approval pathways for permanent outdoor cafes. That's both by right and special exception by use permit. Also looking at how to inform other changes to current regulations for outdoor cafes. And again, really just taking lessons learned over the past 3 years in the pandemic to help inform outdoor cafe framework. Very early on in the study, staff developed a series of overarching study themes that are listed here. I'm not going to read through these, but really focusing on looking at restaurants as a public good, providing mixed use activity in mixed use neighborhoods, looking at restaurant recovery and resiliency and how to bounce back from the pandemic related losses. And also thinking about restaurants and outdoor cafes. There's really different places and spaces. There's not a one size fits all approach for every outdoor cafe. So need to maintain some flexibility in our thinking there. So I'll quickly go over some of the existing policies and guidance for outdoor cafes. There are currently 2 approval processes. for outdoor cafes. That includes on private property. Those cafes can be approved administratively by the zoning ordinance. And then if the outdoor cafe is in the public right of way or on the sidewalk or in public spaces, it requires a use permit approval by the county board. Some other guidelines listed here in policies and regulations, including the zoning, the retail plan, the MTP, pedestrian element, and the public spaces master plan. I'm just going to quickly go through each one of those, just highlighting the key points. So for the zoning ordinance, there are use standards for both the private and the public property. There's a couple of those listed here, for example, that all furniture and fixtures cannot be permanently affixed to the ground. Outdoor cafes cannot be enclosed. There are some restrictions on sound and visual entertainment, and the outdoor cafe should have fewer seats than the indoor portion of the restaurant. And those last two bullets can be modified by the county board by use permit. And then, as I mentioned earlier, any outdoor cafe in the public right of way would be subject to approval by the county board through a use permit. The zoning ordinance regulations, specifically on private property, those going to be approved by right by the zoning administrator. There is a parking ratio for restaurants that has not changed since 1960, which is 1 parking space for every 6 seats inside the restaurant. The restaurants are exempted from parking if they're within 1,000 feet of metro. Of course, the county board can modify this requirement as well by use permit. And the zoning ordinance mandates that the parking spaces be available to cars only, that parking spaces are to be used by the parking of automobiles only, that no other uses can be permitted in a parking space. The Arlington Retail Plan, adopted in 2015, encourages outdoor cafes to enliven streetscape. The action plan encourages an administrative license process to use the public right-of-way. This is the commercial private use of the public right-of-way. This is something that a lot of other cities and jurisdictions are doing, but it did include an action item to develop a process that I'll speak to in a minute. The Master Transportation Plan, pedestrian element, also encourages sidewalk cafes and other enhancements. It does get specific when it talks about clear zones for pedestrian circulation, indicating that 6 feet is the minimum in commercial mixed-use districts. However, county sector plans, streetscape standards, and other site plan conditions may require a wider sidewalk than 6 feet. The Public Spaces Master Plan includes guidance on privately owned public spaces that's noted here, encouraging outdoor cafes to activate public spaces, but to be thought of early on in the design process and not be an afterthought. So real quickly, temporary outdoor seating areas. Again, these are the TOSAs were established in 2020 to help restaurants during the pandemic when seating inside the restaurant was not allowed and that seating outside was their only option. So we developed some flexible design and operational guidelines. We quickly established an online submission process with no application fee. These were approved by the county manager after review by an interdepartmental staff. We currently have approximately 119 TOSAs, both on public and private property, that are still operating today. And then again, noting that those will be expiring on August 15th. Just a collection of some images of some outdoor cafes and TOSAs, kind of highlighting some of the issues that we've learned over the past 3 years with cafe creep, where tables and chairs have kind of moved to create pinch points for pedestrian circulation, as you see in some of these images. There's also the competition for a sidewalk space with other streetscape elements like bike racks, scooters, and other streetscape features. And as you can see from some of these images, some of these are almost creating impassable conditions for maybe more than one person at a time. There's also accessibility issues that we've learned about as well. So the community engagement that I noted that happened in the fall of last year, in general, there was wide support from the local businesses through the pandemic. We heard a lot of support and appreciation for the outdoor dining options. We did hear some concerns about safe, accessible pedestrian circulation, congested sidewalks, accessible routes. And then we did hear some support for the reduction of some parking for expanded outdoor dining options on private property. But above all, the main thing that we did hear throughout was to streamline the review process. That the current process is very costly and lengthy, and they'd like to streamline the review process altogether. This slide just kind of highlights some of the other common themes that we heard on parking and COVID-19 health, safety, and pedestrian safety. I'm going to go now over the recommended framework and key elements. Number one is staff is bringing forward an encroachment ordinance, an outdoor cafe license requirement. This will be a new chapter of the county code. This is being led by our real estate team. This is building off of that recommendation from the retail plan that called for an administrative process for the license of the public right-of-way. So that will be coming forward with the recommendations for the food study. The other main component of the framework includes the zoning ordinance amendments. So we're looking at amendments to permit outdoor seating in public spaces as an administrative review process rather than a use permit review process. We're also looking at the ability to allow the county board to modify parking requirements for outdoor cafes that want to use parking spaces by use permit. And then we also have a third component, which is the county's outdoor cafe guidelines that were last updated in 2013. This would be almost like an all-in-one document reference manual that would include information on how to apply the application and permit process, guidance for clear sidewalks, pedestrian safety, and additional information on fire and building code, including tents and heaters. What's not going to be included in the framework are changes to other state or county codes, the building code, the fire prevention code, the ABC codes, and guidance for tents and heaters. So then we've organized our recommendations into two buckets, basically the public right-of-way or public space, and then private property. So I'll start with public space. I mentioned the county code initiative that the real estate team is working on. Again, this would be an administrative process. There would be an application fee plus an annual license fee based on the cafe square footage. This would be in addition to any other requirements in the building code or the zoning ordinance, for example. And again, these recommendations are coming concurrently alongside the recommendations for the food study this summer. Just a little background on in thinking about a streamlined administrative review process. On average, in between 2015 and 2020, staff reviewed an average of 5 use permits per year and 6 renewals. The process is at a minimum a 3-month process with filing and advertisement deadlines. It requires a public hearing for the county board that's typically on the consent agenda, in which case many of these cases are approved. And it costs a minimum of $2,000 plus any additional cost for the applicant. So the benefits of an administrative process, which we're recommending, certainly streamlines the process, reduces the cost, time, and resources for staff and the applicant, and it also could improve enforcement and inspection through the annual review. It gives the opportunity for staff to check in on the outdoor cafe to ensure that it's still in the layout that's approved on the license. So staff is recommending for the public right-of-way zoning ordinance amendments to allow the administrative review by right in lieu of the use permit. We will be requiring outdoor cafe license and any necessary building permits or certificates of occupancy. And applicants will need to comply with the Virginia building and fire codes And in the zoning ordinance text amendments, we're recommending some design standards, including a 6-foot minimum clear sidewalk, unless approved by site plan. So if there is a site plan that has a larger or wider sidewalk, we will require them to maintain that, or else applicants would need to submit for a site plan amendment, because a lot of the site plans have conditions that have requirements for different streetscape designs. So there's also a requirement for the outdoor cafe to be in the front of the main restaurant. So moving on to outdoor cafes on private property. These are some examples that we saw over the past few years with the TOSAs, where folks have converted off-street private parking spaces into outdoor cafes, like the example you see here at Roadside and Grill. We have, as I mentioned, approximately 119, but only about 11 of these TOSAs are located in private parking areas, and they typically occupy 4 to 5 parking spaces.
Misty, come here.
The staff recommendations for the private property are also zoning ordinance amendments to permit outdoor dining in the required parking spaces by the zoning ordinance through use permit approval by the county board. So we're recommending amendments to the outdoor cafes section of the ordinance with applications that could be filed following county board adoption. As I mentioned, this would only impact about 10 to 12 TOSAs currently, and again, we would be including design standards to aid in our staff review. Schedule and next steps. We are busy this summer. We're continuing to do focused engagement with key stakeholders now through July. We met earlier in May with the zoning committee, and we met with the Transportation Commission for info on the 25th of May. We're here this evening, and then we are meeting with zoning committee tomorrow night, the Chamber of Commerce Wednesday. We've got economic development scheduled for next week, and then the county board request to advertise is on the Tuesday recess meeting. And again, they'll be making the request to advertise will be for the zoning ordinance amendments, and then the encroachment ordinance and the outdoor cafe license. And just the Park and Rec Commission in June, and Transportation Commission for action later this month. And then in early July, meeting with Planning Commission, and then July 15th, a schedule for county board action. So I've just included the link to the project website. I think I also saw it posted in the chat. Here's my contact information. If there's not enough time for Q&A, people can always reach out to me with any questions or comments. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I think there are so many questions. I know in my own head there are, and I see already 4 questions. Why don't we do some really fast questions, and then we'll move right along since we're already behind. Jim Feaster is first.
Yes, Jim Feaster, Pedestrian Advisory Committee. I tell you what, I'll take Brett's advice and just send him a query.
Okay, thank you. Eric Goldstein.
Thanks, Cynthia, and thanks, Brett, for the presentation. Eric Goldstein, also on the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. I guess I'm really concerned about the minimum clear sidewalk width. So you mentioned here 6-foot minimum unless there's a site plan, but you also talked about sector plans and other documents that call for much higher minimum widths. And so what do we, I mean, I don't think we can have as a policy that anyone by right can take up all but 6 feet of the sidewalk, no matter the street, but that seems to be the direction we're heading. Is that, am I misunderstanding, or where are we going in that respect?
Yeah, so the 6-foot dimension comes from a couple of places that existed pre-pandemic and before the study. It was noted in the MTP as a minimum, but then also citing that, you know, again, site plans may, or sector plans may have other requirements which staff would refer to in the review of such applications. And as I mentioned, I think, and you said as well, is that if there was a site plan that required like an 8-foot clear sidewalk, then they wouldn't be able to just go down to 6 administratively. They would need to get a site plan amendment and, present their justification. In which case we would then refer back to sector plans and other policies to determine if that was appropriate for that particular case. And the outdoor cafe guidelines I mentioned, which is an administrative document, was last updated in 2013. Also had the 6-foot clear minimum for the sidewalk width in there. So it was already an existing standard that we followed. I think if you look at a lot of outdoor cafes that have come in for use permit, many of them have a 6-foot clear sidewalk, and so we thought that would be the bare minimum. But we would of course refer back to our sector plans and other guidance for each case. As I mentioned earlier, it's not a one size fits all. There's many different cases, many different conditions that may factor the layout or the clear path. So we would be reviewing those on a case by case basis, but 6 foot would be the absolute minimum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pam.
Hi, Pam Van Hine, Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Another sidewalk question. The location of the sidewalk, is it supposed to be on existing sidewalk? Can they put it in the gutter in the street as is done has been done in Shirlington? I would like it to be a little bit more specific. And also, I wasn't sure whether you really talked about accessibility that much in your guidelines, making sure that people can actually get into the restaurant, off the street, into the restaurant if they're going to have outdoor dining. And are you also going to the Disability Advisory Commission? That's it. Thank you.
Okay, yes, we are not recommending that pedestrians use the street or the on-street parking lane for circulation like they do in Shirlington on Campbell Avenue, for example. So we're not looking to move that condition forward. We want pedestrians on the sidewalk along the building frontage. So that is something we are not recommending to carry forward. The Disability Advisory Committee is not on our list currently, but we could certainly reach out to the liaison and see if there's an opening on the schedule this month or next, so we can look into that. And then for accessibility, I didn't touch on it a lot this evening, but it is something that is part of our building permit review for the Virginia statewide building code. Does have requirements for distances between tables and chairs and the number of accessible seats within an outdoor cafe. So we do already have regulations, state regulations for accessibility that we would be reviewing as part of the permit process to ensure that there is adequate space for accessible users.
Thank you. Collier Cook.
Thank you. With the, I affiliate with the BAC, although I'm not officially on the BAC. Thank you for your presentation. Eric really went to the heart of what I was wanting to ask, is the clear zone. If, just to be clear, if a sector plan were to get changed or streetscape standards were to change, would the existing licensees, would they need to adjust to that, or would they be grandfathered in? And I say that because I worry there's places right now where we have a 6-foot clear zone. And it's just inadequate with the amount of pedestrian volume. I'm talking specifically here in Paulston, and it's just not working well. Even though it meets the current standards, the current standards aren't working. So, would we be able to adjust those in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess if the county board adopts the recommendations and we have zoning ordinance amendments that permit outdoor cafes to be approved administratively, and they're meeting the use standards that we're currently recommending, which includes the 6-foot sidewalk, then they could proceed with that as their clear sidewalk. But I think one thing, so if there was a sector plan update that happened after that, I believe they would be able to still maintain their current layout. But part of the administrative process, the outdoor cafe license includes an annual review. And the outdoor cafe license for those in the public right of way is discretionary. So we don't have to approve every outdoor cafe license that we receive if we determine that it's not appropriate or not consistent with other sector plans or other policy guidance. So but with the annual review, it gives staff the ability to improve enforcement and inspection to ensure that there's some of these cafes aren't expanding like in some of the images that I showed earlier. But once they obtain the license for the outdoor cafe, then they would be required to maintain that. But again, it would be reviewed on an annual basis if conditions change, or if, another example is if for some reason the county has a capital project where they're going to have to demolish a portion of the sidewalk where the cafe is, that we have the right to have that cafe removed in certain cases like that as well. So there's a lot of other revocable provisions in the outdoor cafe license that will be coming forward this summer.
Thank you. We're running short on time, so my suggestion is we hear the questions from Eric Goodman and Noreen, and I have a couple questions, and then we email back and forth with answers. So Eric Goodman, if you can just state your question, and then
All right.
Noreen after.
All right, thanks. And I actually had it in the chat as well, is really how is this going to be enforced? How are you going to maintain compliance? Does somebody have to wait a year until there's enough complaints and when they go for renewal that it's taken care of there? Or is there some process throughout the year or over a short period of time that you either have inspection or you take complaints and you act on the complaints? And also, is there any penalty? Thank you.
Thank you. And Noreen, what was your question?
Yeah, hi, my name's Noreen Hannigan. I'm on the Bicycle Advisory Committee, and I'm also on the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission. I was just wondering if that 6-foot sidewalk width includes tree boxes.
Good question. Thank you. And I will just mention the things that puzzled me, but again, we're not going to answer them now. But the fact that only cars are allowed in the parking spaces, the fact that in New York, like when I go to Brooklyn, they're not invading the sidewalk, the outdoor dining space is not taking from the sidewalk, it's taking from the street. They carve out a lane on the street, which to me makes more sense. And then and my other question was why should there be more seats inside as opposed to outside? That seems arbitrary, but maybe there's a reason. So why don't we wind this discussion up since we're already 10 minutes over, and we can email back and forth with answers. That was way more interesting than any of us expected, and I think we're all full of questions, Brett. So thank you so much.
Cynthia, just before we move on, so this is on the county board agenda for next week. So to the extent the committees want to weigh in, we kind of need to do it now and can't really push this back to email or to a future meeting. So I don't know if that, obviously your meeting, so I don't know if that affects how much time we want to spend on this tonight.
Yeah, the VDOT issues are also pressing since we're under deadline for those as well. So maybe we can do a part 2 to this, or at the end of this meeting, possibly, or in the next few days. I don't know what would make sense.
Well, I'm open to a phone call or tomorrow or whenever, or email to help answer any questions. I think a lot of the questions may be answered when we meet with the zoning committee tomorrow night. I have a staff report and a very lengthy memo that outlines everything in black and white. So I think that may be helpful. I know it's difficult when you see just a quick PowerPoint presentation, but I can provide a link to the ZOCO memo that it's actually posted on their website right now, and it's about 20 some pages filled with a lot of background information, kind of outlining the whole steps and the process and all the considerations and the analysis. So I might encourage folks to kind of skim the memo and see if that helps answer any questions. But if not, I can be available by email or phone call if needed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And maybe we could put that in the chat, or we can send it around by email.
I'll post
The
the link.
Thank
Yeah, I can
you.
put that in.
Wonderful. All right, let's move along, just because we're already over time and we have so many pressing issues in this one meeting. So why don't we start on the Route 1 presentation by Dan Reinhardt? And thank you so much for that, the food presentation. Hi, Dan.
All right. There, John's got this presentation up. It's convenient for me. If we want to save a little bit of time, I can skip a lot of my slides in the beginning here that are all backgrounds. I'll try and go through them as quickly as we can so that we'll try and catch up a little bit here. So thank you all for having us tonight. We look forward to interesting discussion that I'm sure we'll have after the presentation on bicycle and pedestrian issues that arise as part of this Route 1 study. Next slide. All right, so tonight we're going to go through a quick overview, and that's the part that I'll skip most of, is the overview, because you can go back and watch the video online of the public information meeting we just did if you want to catch up on those. Phase 2 feasibility study. So we're going to get into some more detail about the urban design or urban boulevard concept design. We'll go over the multimodal traffic analysis that kind of led us to the travel demand management strategy that we're going to present tonight. We'll talk about some next steps, and then we'll do question and answer. Next. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about, so in 2018, we signed, the state of Virginia signed a agreement with Amazon Services, and it committed to expeditiously evaluate and implement opportunities to improve safety, accessibility, and the pedestrian experience crossing Route 1. And in 2020, we started this study and brought Kimley Horn on board to dive into this topic very specifically and look at the potential for creating an urban boulevard through this corridor. Next slide. So just a quick recap at the at-grade configuration with the what was recommended out of the phase 1 study was an at-grade configuration. Next slide. It has 3 lanes in each direction, left turn lanes at 15th Street, and no turn lanes in any direction at 18th Street. The estimated cost is $180 million. Next slide. Quick, this is a list of tasks. You can see all the green check marks. Those are items we've completed and talked about in previous public information meetings. The couple items outstanding, we still need to conduct a speed study, a design speed study, and we need to move forward with 10% design plans for the concepts that we'll show tonight. Next slide. So we just held public information meeting number 4 in the middle of May, comments are on that. And actually this presentation are due June 16th. There is some work still to be done. As I mentioned, 10% design plans and a speed study. We will also have a draft report, and there will be an opportunity to comment on that draft report and then posting the final report later this year. Next slide. And now I'm going to hand it over to John Martin with Kimley Horn to run us through some of the concepts.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dan. Going to the PowerPoint here. I'm going to start first with the cross sections. We talked about this during the public information meeting, but wanted to just emphasize that the elements of this cross section you see here have been coordinated with Arlington County. We discussed these elements at length, and of note, they came back in December with some very specific comments about the cross section and what they wanted to see, including this roll zone, this cycle track one way in each direction on either side of Route 1. So that was a big change from last summer when we talked about potential cross sections, and we had a couple ideas about bike lanes, cycle tracks, where they should go. The other element are the trees, the large trees. They're canopy trees. That was also emphasized by the county as something they would like to see along this corridor, and so that's what we have here. And the landscape strip in this case on either side of the street is 8 feet. We added a foot to create a 142-foot cross section. In the sector plan, it's 140 feet. And yes, we have 11-foot lanes. We saw a couple comments, a couple questions during the PIM, heard those, and then we saw them following up. There was also a note about the width of a bus. The planning we've done with the county and with VDOT over the years is 10.5 feet from outside mirror to outside mirror on a city bus, and confirmed that with NACTO today, and with some colleagues, but planning for 10.5 feet there, as well as trucks. Larger trucks will use this corridor, will continue to use this corridor, and we've introduced some horizontal curves and vertical curves, and any narrower than 11 feet, there's a greater potential for off-tracking of those trucks, of side swipes between buses and mirrors and trucks and cars. And so 11 feet is the recommendation, is what VDOT is going forward with in this corridor. It's also an evacuation route, Route 1, and we want to just consider that as well. There's a question about maintenance. Moving to the next cross section, you'll see that the 160-foot right-of-way width per the sector plan allows wider elements. And you'll see that we've discussed maintenance. When we think about maintenance, that's going to be a longer-term set of discussions with Arlington County. That in general, the concept is that the county will maintain the street behind the curb. VDOT will maintain the travel way. There's been discussions about who maintains the median. We've talked about the county maintaining those trees in the median. So those conversations will continue during project development. Okay, so that's the cross section. Building face to building face, that street space is a nice design for an urban boulevard. Moving to the plan view, this cross section laid out from 23rd Street on your left up to the interchange. The Urban Boulevard project does go from 23rd Street to the 12th Street overpass. This Urban Boulevard extension into the interchange is an idea that's come along in part because that flyover bridge needs to be replaced, and we have questioned why replace it with a freeway to freeway connection. Why not replace it with a freeway to arterial connection and create the Urban Boulevard further north of Route 1 of 15th Street? So give the signalized intersections at the interchange will encourage drivers to proceed at slower speeds as they move south. So it just creates an overall urban boulevard in the study corridor. You'll see the corridor-wide elements here. No right turn on red, LPI, lots of lighting, ample bicycle pedestrian access up and down Route 1 where there is not today. I've had a couple conversations with some of you at different county meetings and thinking about the future of Route 1 as redevelopment occurs. You'll be able to walk along 18th Street, for instance, and turn the corner and walk along Route 1, or 15th, walk along Route 1. You can't do that today. The land uses just aren't there to make it that conducive to do that, but all that's going to evolve over the years. And 25 miles per hour is the speed limit. The study, we've drafted a study, and that we're going to finalize this just to corroborate that 25 miles an hour will work with all the different design elements that we have proposed here. So, and those elements are there to encourage slower speeds. Before I pass it to Jeff to talk about each intersection, this is an example of the design that we're going forward with. And this is 23rd Street, this 3D model we've created, and you may have seen the fly-through. We've also got that to show you again tonight. But it's 23rd Street with all of its elements. The 3D view giving you a chance to see how everything would work together. Jeff, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Good evening. I'm Jeff Giffen with Kimmel Horn. This first slide, we're going to start from the southern end and work towards the north. This slide shows a 3D rendering, as John mentioned. Just to orient you on the page, north is towards the top left. Clark Street is off to the right of the screen, and Eads is off to the left. The latest concept does show a protected intersection with bicycle facilities behind the curb along Route 1 and 23rd Street. There are median refuges for pedestrians and bicyclists. The northbound left turn lane will be channelized to remove a weave between the airport ramp. And this concept also shows a single southbound left turn lane where there's currently two now. So that would be a reduction of one lane, and that would also provide a wider median for that refuge. This concept does tie into the proposed Arlington County street improvements to the east leg of the intersection, and would provide new bicycle facilities on the west side of 23rd Street where there's none currently. Next slide, John. The next slide shows a plan view of the current concept of Route 1 and 20th Street. This is pretty similar to what we showed you all before. This project, or this location, is being close to being implemented by a developer, and we've been working very closely with Arlington County and the developer to try to minimize any changes to the curb and major equipment such as traffic signal poles. So this is something that we've been closely coordinating and will be implemented relatively soon. Next slide. The next intersection is Route 1 and 18th Street. Again, this slide shows a 3D rendering. North is towards the top left of the screen, and at the very kind of top is the Crystal City Metro Station. Some of the features here are pretty similar to what we just presented at 23rd Street, with protected intersection, separate bicycle and pedestrian crossings, canopy trees, wide pedestrian and bicycle refuge islands. Bicycle facilities are behind the curb along Route 1. Bicycle facilities are along Route on 18th Street are buffered bike lanes. They're not behind the curb, but they're buffered bike lanes. Next slide shows this in plan view. And we, through our public information meetings and other, talking to you all and others, we understand that there's a desire to have a pedestrian, all pedestrians traffic signal phase at this location. We have been exploring this in close partnership with Arlington County. As you all understand, as you all know, Arlington County does operate the signals along Route 1, even though VDOT owns the road. At this point, it's still on the table, but a final decision hasn't been made yet. The next slide shows some of the information that we've been exploring with the all pedestrian phase and the also referred to as a Barnes dance. Some of the benefits of the all pedestrian phase is that it does provide a direct diagonal crossing to the metro station, in a single crossing versus two different crossings of the different legs. It does operate acceptably as an all pedestrian phase from an operation standpoint, and it does provide a vehicle conflict-free crossing with the all pedestrian phase. Some of the challenges that come with this is ADA compliance. If you can go back, John, especially at the corners where we're now introducing several new conflict points, and you can see the inset there at the bottom right of the screen between pedestrians and bicyclists. And we also, with that third crossing at the corner, we're going to need to have 3 different buttons for ADA compliance and making sure we have the audio indication for visually impaired pedestrians. So that's some of the challenges there. We did look at a variety of different aspects of what can we do. Can you do an all pedestrian phase and have long LPIs? Can you do other things to combine that? And what we found was that either you do an all pedestrian phase or you do long LPIs, but if you try to combine them together, that just didn't work from an operation standpoint. And one of the last challenges we have identified is some of the delays with all pedestrian phase could get high, upwards of about 2 minutes. And we just worry, in close partnership with Arlington County, worry that the compliance will be low because people would just get frustrated and try to cross with the vehicle phases. So this is all these things we're still looking into. All pedestrian phases, while there are some in the region, they're not that many, and certainly want to be making sure we look at all the issues as we move into the future design. And so at this point, we haven't made a decision, but that's something we're going to be looking at moving forward. If you go to the next slide, this is the last intersection. Oh, this is just showing a slide of a variety of different barn stance locations across the country and internationally that we've been looking at to look at different examples of how this is treated and how it could be potentially applied here at 18th Street. So next is Route 1 and 15th Street. And this slide shows a 3D rendering again. Again, north is towards the top of the screen. This concept has similarities to some of the other intersections, including protected intersection, wide median refuges, bicycle facilities behind the curb. If you go to the next slide, you can see the plan view of that with all those elements there. We do tie into the Arlington County planned project on 15th Street. And then the last slide shows the potential interchange configuration that John mentioned earlier. This project came about based on an identification of the structurally deficient bridge, the southbound I-395 ramp to southbound Route 1, that flyover ramp. As John mentioned, we took this as an opportunity to look for a better way to reconfigure the interchange. And what we found was by moving the ramps to right exits instead of the left exit, which created a lot of safety challenges, and create those at new traffic signals, this allows us the opportunity to start the urban boulevard from the further north from the project to get vehicle speed slower into the urban boulevard. So again, with those traffic signals, we have opportunities to make the exit and entrance ramps lower speed, again, encouraging the slow speed into the urban boulevard. And this also creates a gateway opportunity with that wide median there near the loop ramp from southbound to, southbound 110 to northbound I-395, including some potential transverse pavement markings, again, to slow speed. Another opportunity is the potential future 10th Street connection to Army Navy Drive. This is just an idea at this point. We have been talking to Arlington County, but no commitments have been made. This is just, we see it as an opportunity for both a vehicle connection and, more importantly, a pedestrian and bicycle connection. Again, providing more crossing opportunities of the Route 1 corridor. Further, we understand that Arlington County is planning a bicycle facility enhancement along Long Bridge Drive, and there's an opportunity for that to also tie in there to further enhance bicycle pedestrian mobility in this whole area. The next thing I wanted to highlight is that we are very aware of Arlington County's Vision Zero policy and have been very closely looking at the Vision Zero toolbox. And we've incorporated many of the toolbox elements into this design. Hopefully you saw those through this presentation. And we're going to continue to focusing on safety as the design progresses.
Thanks, Jeff. And as promised, we've got and thanks, Jeff, also for covering the Vision Zero toolbox features. I mean, we have deliberately, tried to accommodate those in this design, and hopefully you all see that. This is the video that the fly through. I think we have a few minutes here. It's about 2 minutes long. If we can go ahead and show this. So imagine coming off of 395 and coming into this urban boulevard corridor you see here, with trees in the median on the right and left, with pedestrians and bicyclists. Go ahead, you're approaching 15th Street here. with its wide crosswalks for bikes and peds, with its pedestrian refuges, lighting, just a nice urban design for the, for the intersection there. And then moving on down to where you'll see buses or potential bus stops all along Route 1. We haven't shown on-street parking here. That's a future condition. But as you move down toward 18th Street, you continue to see the bikes and the pedestrians, the cycle track, the future buildings. The buildings do represent just potential buildings in the future. They're shapes of the larger buildings that exist today. They'll be fronting the street, 18th Street, with the metro station there in the distance at the northeast corner. You've got, again, pedestrians running in place. It's a function of the software, but you'll see there that crosswalks for bikes and peds moving toward 20th Street. The left turn lane to 20th develops there. Again, large trees, big shade trees, lighting, and the lighting will to be determined whether the lighting is in the median also, but those will all, the lighting will be part of the final the design development during project development in terms of the type and its locations. Moving toward 23rd Street, that one single left turn lane develops. It is it replaces the double left turn lane as you get to the 23rd Street intersection there. You've got the wide crosswalks. You tie to the county-led and developer-led improvements to the east. We've got bike lanes and cycle tracks. We'll move on to the next slide. But we've got bicycle facilities connecting Route 1 over to Eads so that the bike lanes just don't terminate on the west side of Route 1, but they actually connect to the Eads facilities to the west of Route 1. So again, ample access for bikes and peds up and down Route 1 and for transit too. All right. So Anthony's going to tell us how all this is going to work for all those modes in this corridor.
Thanks for teeing me up, John. I'm Anthony Gallo with Kimley Horn. I'm leading a lot of the traffic data collection and modeling efforts for the project. I know a lot of you all attended the PIM and have seen some of the reporting, so I'm going to try to add some context where I can. We've seen several questions that got forwarded to us regarding additional data requests, so we'll try to sprinkle that in where we can and gloss over some other stuff where needed. But as a quick refresher from the previous PIM, we collected data in phase 1 in 2019. We've recollected data in 2022. We actually are doing a third round of data collection this past May and early June to add some additional information along I-395 and a few spot locations along the Route 1 corridor. So we'll be reviewing that as well. Looking at the 2022 traffic data, we know a lot's changed in the region and the study area. Obviously, not just the pandemic, but continued redevelopment of the whole Pentagon City, Crystal City neighborhoods. A lot of that tied to HQ2. Traffic volumes in 2022, we know were lower than they were in 2019 in terms of overall daily traffic and weekday AM peak traffic. Daily traffic volumes is as low by as much as 30% compared to 2019. I did see some requests for some specific ADT data, so I have daily counts pulled up that we got in April 2022. We have a slide in backup as well, but north of 15th Street, the traffic volume on Route 1 is about 54,000 cars per day. And then there's a big drop off at 15th, a lot of turns onto and off of Route 1. So the 18th Street overpass or south of 15th down to about 23rd, you're looking at around 40,000 cars a day. Along 15th to the west of Route 1, about 18,000 cars a day. To the east of Route 1, 8,000 cars a day. 18th Street carries about 5,000 cars a day. The total at the Route 1 and 15th Street intersection is about 60,000 cars a day. That's across all 4 approaches. And then at the Route 1 and 18th Street intersection is about 45,000 cars per day. And again, we have this on a slide and backup, and I'd be happy to talk through further with any of you all on that, but just a little bit more context on daily traffic volumes. A lot of our traffic analysis has been focused on the PM peak, where volumes in 2022 were still a bit lower than in 2019, but the congestion in terms of queuing in the southbound direction has returned. We have this travel time graph showing the bump in the PM peak. Now, outside of the PM peak, and in both directions along Route 1 north of that first signal at 20th, average traffic speeds were significantly higher than the 35-mile-an-hour posted speed limit. We know a lot of folks have concerns about that, given the freeway context of the facility. So the design elements that John and Jeff alluded to are intending to change the context of the corridor and get drivers to reduce their speeds. Go to the next slide. So looking at southbound congestion today in existing conditions, travel speeds heading southbound along Route 1 during a weekday afternoon peak, congestion in the vicinity of the signals at 23rd and 20th due to the bottleneck at those signals. It's pretty consistent with what we saw in 2019 prior to the pandemic. If you go to the next slide and we look at if we plugged in the traffic volumes that we collected in 2022 with the proposed concept that we've been discussing, that area of congestion would shift to the north. Your main pinch point at this point would be the intersection of 15th Street, which would be the first signal heading southbound, and you might see a reduction in congestion further to the south. Looking ahead to the future after the project is built and as the national landing area continues to redevelop, traffic volumes in the region are projected to grow. We showed in phase 1 that if rush hour traffic volumes along Route 1 increased, then we would expect to see a significant increase in congestion and traffic delay, both along Route 1 and on side streets approaching Route 1. So the travel demand management strategy that we'll discuss in a few minutes is intended to mitigate any increases in traffic in the study area and essentially keep rush hour traffic volumes at or below where they are or where they were in April 2022. Several folks here are familiar with the Roslyn-Ballston corridor, thinking about how in North Arlington, along that corridor, daily traffic volumes and peak hour traffic volumes have stayed flat, even as redevelopment has continued. That's the intent here. That's what the TDM strategy is intended to get at that we'll be discussing. John, if you could keep going. Want to again give a refresher on our methodology for developing the TDM strategy and maybe add a little more context here as well. So we did look not just at 2022 traffic volumes, but projected 2030 traffic volumes, both with and then with or without, and then with a TDM strategy in place, looking at what are specific problem movements along the Route 1 corridor in which there would be traffic congestion impacts that would need to be mitigated in order to avoid excessive delays or backups on I-395. So these are the first and foremost intent of the TDM strategy that we're going to discuss is to mitigate severe congestion. This is a multimodal project. We're evaluating trade-offs across all modes, but we're looking for the TDM strategy is focused on how do we prevent those vehicular backups that would be unacceptable to the general public. So we had a pretty iterative process looking at various problem movements focused on the Route 1 and 15th Street intersection, looking at what traffic volumes would need to be shifted to other modes. The focus here was on transit. Obviously, other modes are in play. The transit amenable trips I'll discuss in a little bit more detail in a minute. Then we estimated whether or not those reductions would even be feasible, looking at mobile device analytics. So we used a platform called Streetlight Data to quantify how many of the trips that are making specific movements at the Route 1 and 15th Street intersection have their start and end point near transit station, but is a vehicular trip today that passes through the intersection. So we were specifically focused on movements that are served by multiple parallel transit options, most notably Metro Rail, that can have the capacity to absorb more trips. We know there's a lot of capacity on not just Metro Rail, but parallel bus service as well, and there will be more in the future. And then the TDM program of specific investments is intended to ship those trips to those modes. You go to the next slide, John. So the three problem movements that we identified at the Route 1 and 15th Street intersection, again, as a refresher, and I'm assuming most folks here saw the PIM presentation, are the southbound right turn, southbound through movement, and eastbound left turn at the Route 1 and 15th Street intersection. This is focused specifically on the PM peak because that's when we're seeing these severe congestion issues with the at-grade intersection. So looking at the southbound right turn and eastbound left turn combination, these are opposing movements. They carry a high percentage of trips where one end of the trip is in either North Arlington along the Roslyn-Ballston corridor or in that central business district core of DC. And the other end of the trip is located in either Pentagon City or Crystal City. So these are trips that we know are conveniently served by numerous multimodal options, bus, trail, and most notably Metro Rail. I used to live in the River House and would kind of grapple with this conflict every day. So the heat map that you're looking at specifically is looking at trips heading southbound along Route 1 that are using the ramp to 15th Street and where those trips are coming from and heading to. So if we're looking at vehicle trips making that southbound right turns, this would be a trip from the Roslyn-Ballston corridor or from DC to Pentagon City. Approximately 55% of those trips are estimated to be amenable to a mode shift, meaning that both their start and end points are near high frequency transit. For the reversed eastbound left turn movements, these would be trips from Pentagon City to the Roslyn-Ballston corridor or to DC. Approximately 36% of those trips in the PM peak period are estimated to be transit amenable. If we go to the next slide and look at the southbound through movements, again, this is a movement that is carrying a heavy percentage of traffic originating in DC or along the Roslyn-Ballston corridor. Most of those trips are destined for South Arlington or the more north side of Alexandria, so the Potomac Yard or Old Town areas. So at this point, so this is Route 1, essentially on the overpass above 15th Street. 25% of those trips get off before you get to the airport. Another 40% are exiting by the time you get to Potomac Yard, and another 25% by the time you get to Old Town. So that's essentially 90% of your trips ending before you get to Old Town, and only 10% making it as far south as the Beltway. Our travel demand management program is going to focus on trips between Alexandria and Potomac Yard, and Pentagon City in the district and the Roslyn-Ballston corridor. We know there's not just Metro Rail, but and the new Metro Rail station, but the Metroway service as well through here. Now, when we look at the percentage of transit amenable trips that are traveling southbound through here along Route 1, we do see a lower percentage of trips in the PM peak period in which both the start and end point are in the vicinity of high frequency transit. So this is estimated only to be around 12% of the trips along southbound Route 1 at this time. And so we are initially targeting a lower trip reduction for this movement. So this next slide, again, will bring together the three main problem movements that we're calling them at the Route 1 and 15th Street intersection: the southbound right, the eastbound left, and the southbound through. You can keep going, John. And then, so looking at those movements, I know there's some questions about this slide in particular. Looking at these movements and the travel patterns these movements serve. So again, we've summarized the major origin destination pairs that are being served by these movements. The reductions that are being shown are talking about the reduction in vehicle trip that is needed from the projected 2030 peak period, PM peak period traffic volume at the Route 1 and 15th Street intersection. So this is the percent reduction we need from the projected future volume in order to avoid excessive queuing along either the side streets or along southbound Route 1. So again, I went through this pretty quickly at the PIM, but the projected future 2030 volume of this intersection is forecasted to be approximately 10% higher than what it was in 2022. And we're saying that we need a 10% reduction from that amount. So in more simple terms, the total amount of traffic passing through the intersection essentially needs to remain where it's at today. Obviously, there's some nuance to that statement as we're targeting reductions for specific individual movements that are going to need a larger reduction than just essentially having reductions that are beyond what is out there today, lower traffic volumes in the future than what's out there today. We're focused mainly on where vehicle trips where the start and end points are close to high frequency transit, most notably Metro Rail. And then Lucas is going to talk about the strategy and investment to incentivize shifting those trips out of vehicles and onto transit.
Thanks, Anthony. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lucas Muller. I'm a multimodal planner with Kimley Horn, supporting this effort. One of the most important things that we looked at when we were developing this TDM strategy is how can we build on the robust network of existing transit and TDM strategies that are already out there. And so to meet or exceed that targeted volume shift, the team in coordination with the RPT, Arlington County, and regional transit TDM stakeholders developed this program of TDM strategies that builds on what is there today. And so we'll describe that in more detail. One of the questions that we did get was related to who are the other entities that we will be working with. There are already a lot of local and regional and statewide entities that do work to provide and promote transit and TDM strategies. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, their Commuter Connections program, the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, as well as local governments, of course, in Arlington, but then also in surrounding jurisdictions like City of Alexandria, Fairfax County, Prince William County, Loudoun, and certainly as local business improvement districts as well. And of course, with some of the origin destination patterns that Anthony mentioned, we want to make sure we're also coordinating with DC and Maryland as well. So you can go to the next slide. And so we mentioned in terms of the robust network of existing multimodal efforts that are present in the corridor today. Of note, certainly the blue and yellow Metro rail lines, VRE commuter train, Metroway BRT service, as well as multiple Arlington Transit, WMATA, and regional commuter buses that serve the area, as well as a growing network of protected bike facilities and bike share stations as well. And so one of the things we like to look at, it's easy to see the number of vehicles on Route 1, but to understand how many people, how many person trips are going through the corridor. We looked at a variety of different data sources, and around the spring 22 timeframe, the number of people that are traveling by non-single occupant modes during PM peak exceeds those that are driving alone by 4,000 people. And so it's easy, it helps put into perspective kind of how many people are moving through this corridor in other means than driving. And we want to make sure that there is a focus on those individuals. Pre-COVID, looking at those numbers pre-COVID, the number of non-SOV travel is even greater, emphasizing that there is capacity on that network to absorb more of that travel. Go to the next slide. Many of you are probably familiar with many of the projects that are emphasized here on this map, some of which are a part of the agreement between the Commonwealth and Amazon, as well as efforts that predated that, a variety of improvements in terms of pedestrian and bicycle connections, transit enhancements, rail platform improvements. Arlington County has $90 million as part of that agreement for Complete Streets project in the corridor, as well as other pedestrian and bicycle improvements that improve safety and connectivity for vulnerable roadway users. VRE, as part of the Transforming Rail in Virginia program, is expecting to increase frequency about 10 trips per day, and also look at service during non-peak and reverse service as well. South of this area, Fairfax County investing in bus rapid transit along Route 1. WMATA is also making progress getting back to pre-COVID rail frequencies and looking to improve bus service through the ongoing bus network redesign project. A lot of existing efforts in this area to promote multimodal strategies. But if you go to the next slide, I recognize that those services alone are not enough to create behavior change. It is certainly, as many of you probably can attest, not a simple snap of your fingers and all of a sudden everyone changes mode. And so we want to be proactive about that approach. And we are proposed to do that. We're proposing a series of new strategies to promote and incentivize the available transit service that is out there. And this certainly builds on research and lessons learned from both locally in Arlington County as well as around the country. First is a marketing and promotional awareness campaign. People need to know about the transit or rail services and how to use them in order for them to be effective. We're also looking at a series of financial incentives that will be available both directly to individuals to try new modes and then working directly with large employers as well to promote these strategies, as well as employer-specific programs like parking cash out, which, if you're not familiar, provides funds for transit for those who currently do receive free parking from their employer. So these incentives will be specifically targeted for travel in the corridor. They will be monitored and evaluated and certainly coordinated closely with existing efforts that are focused more regionally. So we want to make sure that the resources and the efforts that are getting invested are able to be targeted to this corridor so that they can help achieve those volume shifts. We talked a lot about infrastructure, a lot of funding sources currently in play to advance large projects, but also smaller infrastructure projects that help support first and last mile connections, comfort and safety at transit stops, and certainly wanting to work with local and regional transit partners to advance these projects in and around the corridor. The next slide, we had shown the map previously, but wanting to also show some of the key bus routes, rail lines, and bike share stations that can be used in the area, and certainly leveraging those proposed incentives. Most notably, the ART 43 Metro Rail Blue and Yellow line. Those are and the proposed route that is similar to the previous Metrobus 11Y, those really best align with the travel movements identified for the shift that Anthony discussed in terms of the movements. On the next slide, we have kind of a real world example to provide kind of a tangible example of what this could mean for an individual. You can go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, that was that was one of our previous slides. But we had an example in the PIM presentation about someone who lives in Roslyn but drives to work in Pentagon City.
Sorry, Lucas, we
being
thought
able
we'd
to use
streamline.
the incentives. No worries, John. But in terms of kind of rolling that up to what that means to the bigger picture, with those proposed incentives and the focus on implementing infrastructure, a breakdown of how that shifts in trips is forecasted to change based on research, existing mode split, and alignment with the identified movements. So of that overall volume at the Route 1 and 15th Street intersection in the PM peak period, we're targeting to shift at least 10% of those trips to a non-SOV mode. We anticipate about 2/3 of those people will shift to Metro Rail, others to bus, and certainly others will bike, walk, telework, or change their time of trip, which also would reduce that peak period shift. There are on the next slide, there are existing research on the effectiveness of TDM strategies. It certainly is something that can be difficult to measure, largely due to the need for surveying and to understand, really ask people what did change your mode given the large amount of factors. But the 10% that we are proposing is well within what the range of existing research shows as possible, especially in areas of high transit and a mix of paid and free parking. Next slide. And I mentioned some of the research that we looked at, and definitely because of the complex nature of this effort, the team looked both locally and nationally to get perspectives on how TDM programs have worked. Here in Arlington, despite significant transit-oriented development, traffic volumes did have decreased along major corridors like the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor. Over on the West Coast in Seattle, they experienced a significant drop in drive-alone mode share working with employers. And so, some of those important takeaways that we learned from those case studies, again, critical nature of maximizing space and existing capacity on transit. A lot of all of the capacity that we need to accommodate this 10% is there in terms of existing and even expanded during planned capacity. And so focus will need to be on shifting that travel behavior. Most successful TDM programs, no secret, most successful in urban and walkable areas, that connection between land use and transportation. And then certainly some of the research on what are the most effective strategies, financial incentives, and working through large employers were essentially the most cost-effective drivers for shifting those modes. With that, I'll wrap up the TDM portion and kick it back to John, I believe.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. Thanks very much. And tonight you've heard an update similar to what you heard at the public information meeting that on the urban design concepts, the multiple analyses, and the approach for TDM, which Lucas has covered here eloquently. And Anthony, thank you also for deliberately covering some responses to the many questions we've received so far. And certainly, we can address those during Q&A. And Dan, you want to cover where we're headed next after this phase 2 feasibility study is complete? Or I can.
I'm on mute here, aren't I?
Okay.
All right. So kind of the next steps, we're going to receive comments that I think Pam mentioned the comments earlier. The deadline is June 16th. We're going to try to address those comments as we put together the final or the draft report for the phase 2 study. There will be a comment period on the draft report. We will synthesize those comments into a final report and post that later this year. And kind of simultaneously, we'll also be working on an interchange analysis at 395 and 110. We'll be moving forward with the 10% design plans. And we're also going to be working on the speed study, the engineering speed study. And we hope to wrap that up kind of the middle of next year. Next slide. And so I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. So Cynthia, I don't know if you want to us to kind of walk through some of the comments that are already in the chat, or do we want to open it up for verbal comments?
Thank you so much. Why don't we start with Dana, because Dana commented in the chat and also together with Pam spent hours and hours going through the slides and preparing comments. So maybe why don't we start with Dana and then with Pam to raise some of the questions that have not yet been covered in the presentation thus far.
Okay, let's hit TDM. In the PIM, you suggested a 4 or 5 year, let's call it a preparatory phase for TDM, where you were proposing to spend $500,000 a year doing TDM. When is that going to start?
So when
The project is now 5 years before you hope to have this under construction 5 years from now, I believe.
Right. So once we achieve the full funding to move forward with the project, I'm anticipating one of the first tasks we would do is ramp up that implementation study for implementing the TDM strategy, and then that would go on during the design and construction phase. I see Lucas popped up. He can maybe add some more detail to that.
I think you hit it, Dan. It does take time to create that behavior change. It's also important to do that during the construction period. So I think the bars on the the construction period will last multiple years, and to make sure that the strategies are also in place during the construction, sometimes called the Transportation Management Plan or TMP, is an important element as well.
Okay, I guess the question is, if TDM is so wonderful, why don't we just do it regardless of whether we build this thing?
There really isn't, at least from the state's perspective, there really isn't a need to do it unless we bring Route 1 down to grade. I mean, I think our traffic analysis has shown that 15th and 18th Street function adequately today if left in their elevated condition.
Okay, but 23rd Street sucks right now.
Well, and in large part, we're going to try and clean up 23rd Street to the best we can, but in large part, 23rd Street requires redevelopment to relocate Clark Street in order to truly address the problems that are occurring at 23rd Street.
Okay. Let me go back to the beg buttons at 18th Street with the barn stands. If we have 3 buttons, won't all of the buttons do the same thing? Call for an all pedestrian phase? And
So
if all 3 of the buttons do the same thing, why do you think we need 3 buttons?
So I can give you a couple different perspectives on this. So one is we want to build in the ability for potential differing operations in the future rather than having to dig up the intersection. I know that at WNOD and Columbia Pike, I was on the Columbia Pike team. We worked with the traffic engineering folks at Arlington and decided to put the push buttons in, even though the signal was going to be on recall. But a newer piece of information that I didn't realize until we did meet with the Virginia Department for the Blind and Vision Impaired.
Yep.
And they were advocates of putting in those push buttons as well. I guess if you walk up and you push the new audible push buttons and you hold it for 3 seconds, it'll tell you what that push button is for. And it kind of helps align those blind and visually impaired folks as to what they're standing there for and what the button is doing for them. So we would want to have all those capabilities in place, even if the signal is on recall, which I believe that's probably what Jeff was going to say. Is that right now? I think the design is set for recall in the analysis that we have so far.
Yep, you covered it.
Okay.
And you're not going to go with ultrasonic sensors or anything that don't require the buttons?
That I'm going to need Jeff to jump in on ultrasonic sensors.
Yeah, I mean the county has done what they call passive detection, where you don't have buttons. The challenge is, again, for ADA access for folks with visual impairments, they need that button with the vibrotactile arrow and with the audible indication to know where they're crossing, and that's important for those crossings.
Okay, speed on Route 110. Where are you going to start moderating it?
I don't know that we've fully determined that yet. That'll be part of the speed study that we do. I think we are anticipating that we would probably need to start dropping north of 395, but we don't have a full determination on that yet.
What
John.
you said? No, what you said, Dan, north of 395, going from 45 to 35, and then probably get past those ramps there and go to 25. That's a thought. We still need to work through that.
Okay, and are we in agreement that Route 110 is not a limited access road, according to VDOT?
I need to dig into that a little further, but I believe you're right. I believe
If you could please get back with me on that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, Pam, you're up. We're sent back to Cynthia.
Yeah, is Pam here? And would Pam like to ask any questions now?
Yeah, I forgot to unmute. Sorry about
Yeah, I
that.
figured.
Trying to be quiet. One of the things we asked for tonight was actual numbers, not all these percentages. It's really hard to figure out what's going on when you just have percentages. So I know you're not going to give them to us tonight, but if you can give them to us as soon as possible afterwards, we really need to know how things are changing, exactly what you're measuring, how all this works. I'm disappointed both in 18th Street and in the TDM plan. For 18th, the short answer is you've got to figure out the barn stance. It's got to be a reasonable signal cycle for everybody. And we also need an alternative. And if the alternative is going to be the tunnel by the Marriott, then you've got to, somebody's got to figure out a safe crosswalk over Eads as well. And that's not going to solve the problem for bikes unless you're going to have bikes running through the hotel, which I don't think people really want to do. For the TDM, in PIM 3 for phase 1, one of the final slides was that you were going to reduce traffic by 20 to 30% to achieve your TDM goals. And you also had, were projecting out to 2040. Now you're projecting to 2030. I don't know why you're not going beyond that. And we're talking about a 10% reduction from 2022. And I personally, and I think many of us have doubts about what gathering traffic data during COVID really means, and we're still having that impact. My sense is that increasingly employers are telling their employees they have to come back to work. So one way or the other, there's either going to be more traffic or there's going to be a greater need for transit. And what I'm not seeing so much in your discussions is how VDOT, the state, whatever, is really going to fix transit, give it the financial support it needs, how to get the people they need, how we're going to fix safety. I think one of the reasons people are still driving because it's convenient and it's safe. It may be expensive, but we need to make transit as convenient and easy and as safe as driving, and it's not. ART 43 bus is wonderful. I love it. I take it all the time. It doesn't run on the weekends. That doesn't help. It doesn't run all night. That doesn't help either. A lot of people that are coming in and out of this area need really good alternative transportation 24/7. It's reliable, affordable, all of those things. And I again think that the program needs to be really regional. And I'm happy to hear tonight that you're actually talking about Metropolitan Washington COG, working with them. And a little bit broader than just Arlington and Alexandria, but it's a regional problem. It's a DMV. It is not just our area. So I hope that you keep working on that. But yeah, I think a lot of my comments and other comments that we will be producing in various forms are going to be on those two issues. Making sure anything you do with 18th Street is really safe and that the TDM plan really makes sense. Because right now it's still not making sense to me. Thank you.
Well, so let's tackle a couple of those. I'll do them in reverse here. So I guess one of the things to think about, and I thought of this, and I didn't want to interrupt Anthony as he was going through things. Anthony was talking a lot about targeting folks and targeting Crystal City and DC and Pentagon City and Roslyn Ballston corridor. And a lot of that is so that we can formulate a plan. Like we need to know who has easy access to a bus, because those are going to be the easiest ones for us to flip into getting on the bus and out of their car. And so when he's talking about targeting, he's really looking at how do we make the intersections function, and who are going to be the easiest people to get onto another form of transportation, whatever those are. So, and that's really, it's more of a feasibility thing. And then we flip over into what Lucas is doing, and Lucas is proposing employer plans and financial incentives. And I don't know that we're necessarily going to limit those to you must be in Roslyn Ballston and coming to Crystal City. You know, we're going to be working with employers, and who do you have in your employment that would be willing to take a bus or a train, and trying to provide incentives to those folks to get them out of the corridor. And they may be from Maryland, and they may be from Woodbridge. And so we're kind of coming at this from multiple angles, but I think a lot of the targeting that we're talking about is really very specific to, you know, who is going to be the people that we think we're going to be able to flip, as well as what are the specific intersections and movements that we need to really adjust. And Anthony or Lucas, did I miss anything there?
I mean, I would just ask, you know, Pat, like we as, you know, we as planners and people, we agree that, like, we agree with you with that overall goal that, you know, transit needs to be more competitive, accessible, reliable. And those are really all important goals that, like you said, the region collectively needs to and is working towards, with things like, you know, transforming rail, with the metro bus network redesign, with Arlington's transit strategic plan. Those are ongoing efforts that are trying to solve that, you know, that larger challenge that we have in this complicated region, where people moving along. I think for this project, we are tasked, like Dan and Anthony were saying, of trying to identify, you know, a set of specific strategies that are relevant to these movements and to this project. But, you know, certainly on a broader scale, you know, there are a lot of ongoing efforts. This one project, unfortunately, cannot solve all of the, you know, of the transit competitiveness challenges in our region. And so, you know, trying to focus for this project on what is related to these specific movements, and then supporting other regional efforts that are moving other initiatives forward.
We're targeting 10% right now, and we could talk about that number in a minute too. If it ends up needing to be 15%, that's what we're going to go after, is 15%.
Can I ask one question about the TMD? One of the slides I thought was fascinating and very troubling was the one showing that even though in our area, my neighborhood, more people don't drive, the number of people driving has increased a huge and disturbing amount. How are you identifying those specific people and getting them back on transit? and I think, you know, you talk about employer benefits and all that. Those people probably already have all that. That's fairly standard around here. They need other things. I'm not sure what they are, but it really bothers me that we're going the wrong direction with that specific population. And apparently that's one of the populations you're specifically targeting. So what are your thoughts on that?
I guess which slide are you referring to specifically?
Keep going. That one. Look back. Forward,
I think
maybe.
the one.
That one.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah. This is the one that really concerns me. How do you get
Because
these specific people back out of their cars when they weren't driving before?
well, so one of the things we're seeing, and I guess just to clear up, I guess some of the traffic volume numbers. I think Anthony explained it better this time than we did during the public information meeting. 2019, we counted we needed a 20 to 30% reduction in traffic volumes in order to make the at-grade urban boulevard work. When we recounted in 22, obviously the traffic volumes had dropped dramatically, but we found those 2022 traffic volumes worked for what we needed to process traffic on Route 1 and the side streets. And so the 10% that we were looking at at the reduction for is really forever. We're going to need to keep those 2022 volumes to make the at-grade urban boulevard work. And so that TDM strategy is going to be essentially an ongoing thing for the existence of Route 1 in order to keep those volumes. I think what you're seeing here is that it's been more convenient for people to get in their car. But I think we're all anticipating people coming back to work. There's going to be more traffic. There's going to be more congestion that we're going to be trying to fight to keep those numbers down. But that, I think, will be part of the driver to get people back on transit, is that increasing volume. And it may be that we have to provide greater incentive. You know, maybe they get $5 a day now, and maybe it has to be 10. Those are things that we're going to have to work out during our implementation plan.
And I think I'll just add, I think some of the incentive has to come from, and I see this in some of the comments, the convenience of taking transit versus driving. Again, I used to live in River House and kind of grapple with this every day. Am I going to take some back way? Am I going to take transit out to Reston? Am I going to get on at Route 1 at 15th Street? And usually, I mean, 80% of the time, 75% of the time, I'd say I drove. And because that transfer at Roslyn was bad, the metro, wasn't always the most reliable. This is the mid 2010s. There were service disruptions. So I think part of the answer is, one, the reliability and investments in metro and VRE, which are, I mean, I know there's a lot of planned investment, and we need to bank on the frequencies and reliability of metro and VRE improving and encouraging more folks to ride them, because the capacity will certainly be there. And then the disincentive that will also come about from Route 1 being a more congested corridor, when transit becomes more competitive with driving, people will start to take transit.
So I don't know if we covered what you needed there, Pam, but I would like to go back and cover your barn stance that you talked about earlier.
Okay. And I still want
Okay.
numbers at some point.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Because you are a very important group for us to kind of talk through the barn stance with, because we've tried to provide everything at 18th Street and Route 1 that you've asked for. So we tried to provide the protected intersection to make, to provide that separation from the bikes and the vehicles. We would like to make this as safe as possible for the pedestrians, giving them the all pedestrian phase to cross. But several things have kind of come up as we've looked at this. Like there was a slide in here that we don't need to go back to right now, but we looked around the country at barn stances, and we looked around the country at protected intersections. And there really isn't anywhere that we've been able to find that does both, that does a protected intersection in the manner that NACTO recommends protected intersections, and is shown at a lot of the protected intersections that are done around the country, and does the barn stance. So if you go back to the other slide, when we showed this to Arlington and said, this is kind of what we're thinking, they're the ones who kind of pointed out, all those conflicts at the bottom right. So now we've got bikes and peds running at the same time through this corner where everybody's going in every direction. And they're not comfortable with that. And so, we have some work to do still with Arlington County on, either trying to get them over that hump and feel comfortable with it, or look at other options. We considered maybe doing, we looked at maybe doing an all ped phase without the diagonals, because that would clean up some of these conflict points. At that point, you end up crossing one leg and then getting to the other side if you're a pedestrian, and then waiting the cycle to go across the next leg if you're going diagonally, which wasn't necessarily ideal. So, okay, so what else do we have? We thought about maybe running the crosswalks with an LPI along with the parallel phase of traffic and having an all pedestrian phase, but that actually didn't work for traffic. The LPI just takes too much out of the vehicular timing, and ends up starting to clog up the upstream intersections. And then there's one other option, which was, maybe we have a barn stance only for pedestrians and have the bikes, we can run a median for protection or a buffer. It could be a hardscape or paint for having the bicycle stay next to the traffic, and we have the barn stance for pedestrians. And so I kind of like to hear some feedback from you all about what your thoughts are on, do you like the barn stance with the bikes and peds moving at the same time?
Noreen, you have your hand up. Is that an answer to this question?
No, I'm sorry. I thought I put my hand down.
All right, Dana.
Yeah, I'll take a swing at that. No, the barn stance is great, but the problem is, you haven't described any enforcement strategies at all. You've already acknowledged the fact that cars are speeding on Route 1 now, and everybody is saying, oh, well. So if you're going to try to regulate bicycles, who's going to do the regulation? Bicycles are move with pedestrians now everywhere. Trying to separate them out and do some education process is probably going to take more resources than VDOT has. My recommendation is that would be a fool's errand, and don't go there.
Okay, so just keep them running with the pedestrians.
Yeah, I think we regularly run with pedestrians now, and the number of pedestrians that have been killed by cyclists pales in comparison to the number of pedestrians that have been killed by motorists. Motorists are who scares us, both pedestrians and cyclists.
Okay.
As far as I'm concerned, close the traffic at 395 and give us a full pedestrian phase all the way to 23rd Street.
Okay. That's good feedback.
You know, it seems that the real answer is if we would throw some money at hiring some first-class architects, we could come up with a way to keep the grade separation at 18th Street, which is what we really want, and build buildings up to the build line and just have a mezzanine level that, you know, that we can sip our lattes at, and then we go down and there's a street level at the other side. I don't believe that would be particularly difficult. You know, remember, we started this project with no visioning process. We started the project considering at grade or elevated, and not how do we get a world-class urban boulevard.
Okay.
You're not going to get, you don't lose much land by keeping the 18th Street elevated. And the uphill and downhill will just give you a little bit more urban flavor that will help moderate the speeds of traffic.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that feedback.
Dan,
That
we do
actually-
have some backup slides with numbers if that would help. But it's up to you, Dan, if you want us to show those tonight or just try them later in response to the questions.
Well, let's see where the questions go. I want to give everybody a chance because we are running out of time quickly here.
Right. Okay.
Pam.
All right.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I totally agree with Dana's comments on combining bikes and peds and trying to keep 18th the way it is or slightly modified. Thank you.
Okay.
There was a question about 23rd Street in the chat. Are we making 23rd Street wider? And I don't think we are. You can see from this graphic that it's a protected intersection design. So the existing crossing distance that's there today would stay the same. But we've added the protected intersection, the corners there, and the bicycle facilities over to Eade Street. So this is what VDOT is proposing to improve the existing intersection. The best thing that's going to happen is moving Clark Street to the east, but that's a very long-term project dependent upon redevelopment.
And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but so you're looking north here, the west
Right.
side, the left side, it would remain 6 lanes. We are proposing to put cycle tracks in that block to get you over to Eade Street.
Right.
Those are really the changes that are happening with this project.
Right.
A lot of, and then the medians, we would
Yeah.
provide the full medians and the single left turn lane southbound.
Right.
On the right, this is really a concept that Arlington has come up with, if I remember correctly.
Right.
And this is part of their ongoing plan for 23rd Street, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is Steve Offit. That was my comment. Yeah, I mean, definitely Route 1 is significantly improved, but I didn't know if there's an opportunity there to somehow make crossing north-south. I mean, I got to tell you, crossing 23rd, particularly on the east side, is not comfortable at all now as a pedestrian, and I guess that's not going to get better. And even on the west side, not particularly, because it is pretty wide crossing without any. It's just complete exposure to everything.
Yep.
So anyway, that was my comment. It seemed like that didn't get improved, despite the fact that a lot of things on Route 1 itself did.
Yep.
It is going to be a little different because you'll notice on the east side, the median is gone. And that's in line with, because there's the big median where the tunnel used to come out. That median is being removed as part of a plan that Arlington has put together for that side of 23rd.
Yeah.
So actually, as I'm looking at the aerial on my other screen here, there's a big island right now in between Route 1 and Clark Street that has a set of crosswalks in it. That would go away. 23rd Street gets narrower because the median goes away and the crosswalk moves back.
Yeah, the whole east side gets cleaned up with the county's project, yes. Okay.
This is Cynthia. I had a question about sort of how you're framing or defining the TDM. It seems like it's all about reducing congestion for cars to prevent bottlenecks for cars. And thus, if you were to convince drivers to say start work earlier or later, that would count as a success in your TDM strategy because you would have reduced the amount of traffic for the drivers during the peak periods. I'm wondering if you can change the metric or add an additional metric that looks not just at peak, but at cars that go through this area. I mean, certainly if your goal is to improve safety and the pedestrian experience, we care. It makes a huge difference if there are cars racing through at all hours. And certainly in my field of air pollution, I don't care when the cars are going through, it still should count because it's hurting people's health. And even more now that we'll be right next to the cars. So I'm wondering if you can change your metric or add a new metric in defining TDM.
That's something we can consider, but the key point for us, so there's certain things that we're really trying to achieve. We're actually okay with the level of service degrading on Route 1, but there are certain things like backing traffic up onto 395 that we can't allow. And so that's really where the EDM strategy is focused, is trying to not completely gridlock Eads and 15th Street, let's say, or back traffic up onto 395. Those are the things we're looking at to keep Route 1 functioning in the at-grade condition. And so I'm not sure. I think you would get some reduction in midday. Nobody's driving to lunch if they're not at work, if they work from home that day. So I think you're right. There would be telework, changing your time of day do count for the TDM strategy we're trying to achieve here, but that's because of what we're trying to achieve with it.
All right. Somehow it already is 8:55. The time flew. Does anyone else have a pressing question, or should we finish this up and next coordinate over email? I know that there are a whole bunch of questions in the chat. Can we get answers to the chat questions?
Yeah. We can certainly respond to the chat questions.
That would be wonderful. And you can send them to me or Pam or any of
Af-
us.
After we get disconnected, however, we will not have access to the chat questions. Could somebody send those to us? Because we won't have Teams access to them.
Right. Good
Right,
point.
maybe Leah or someone from the county.
Yeah, this is Leah. I'll go ahead and download those questions once the meeting is over and send those as a Word doc.
Thanks, Leah.
That would be great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I need them too.
All right. Well, in the interest of respecting everybody's time, I guess we should finish this up. Steve, your hand is up. Is it still up or is it newly up? Now it's down. All right. Thank you so very much. This has been incredibly helpful.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us.
We will be in touch.
All right, thanks.
thank
Have
you.
a good night.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care.
Take care. All right. So we have maybe 4 minutes, 3 minutes left um, for PAC and BAC business. Pam, you want to go first?
Yeah. I want to propose that the backpack write another joint letter to the county manager about Route 1, if we can get some consensus on whether we want to do that, and volunteers to help write that, other than Dana and me. So I hate, we really shouldn't be doing a joint motion, but we're going to do a joint motion for both groups. I move that the backpack write a letter to the county manager about VDOT's PIM4 plans for Route 1 before the deadline.
Second.
Okay, any discussion or comments about this? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. I think I'll send an email out and people can volunteer to do this, and we need to get working on it this week. The other issue which Eric Goldstein raised was whether either the PAC alone or the backpack separately or with the PAC write a letter to the county manager, of course, about the food study and our remaining concerns, primarily, I guess, about sidewalks, among other things. So I will I will have another motion. I recommend I have a motion that the backpack write a letter to the county manager with some concerns about the food study, and that again before their deadline, so probably within the next week as well. Any seconds?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. And all in favor? Aye.
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 Eric Goldstein, do you want to handle that? Are you still online?
I can at least start a draft.
Yeah, you are extremely articulate on this, and well, in general, I think the PAC is more concerned than the BAC, but you know, we all like eating out sometimes, but we're all would like to actually be able to use the sidewalks and streets as they're meant to be designed. So thank you, Eric. Thank you, everybody. That's this coming Monday, the CPHD staff are putting on a special program open to anyone on SPRC process. So if anyone's interested in that, plan to attend, I'll forward the notice about that again too. Thank you. I'm done.
Wonderful. Thank you. And huge thanks to Dana and to Pam for spending hours and hours and hours of their time these last few days and weeks going through the slides from not just this recent batch, but all of the batches on VDOT Route 1. That was a huge effort. So let's see, Leah, you're next.
I can keep this really quick. I just wanted to let everyone know that this will actually be my last BAC PAC meeting. I'm leaving the county, so I will be gone in, I guess, in the next 2 weeks. I've really enjoyed working with this group though, and you'll be in great hands. Elwyn is going to take the role as a BAC liaison. But feel free to reach out. My last day is June 16th, so I'll be around for a little longer. But thank you, because this is one of the first roles that I had at the county. And it was really helpful and helps me learn a lot, especially in those first few months.
thank you for everything you've done. It's been a pleasure. And good luck in your future. It sounds great.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. And now Dana.
Yeah, 15th Street and Eads is just about done. So please, without trying to skew the results, you know, take a little tourist run down there and see what you think about the bike and ped facilities at the corners. I put a note out on the BAC listserv to that effect. Because whether we like it or not, that's likely what the county's going to use as the model for the next one. So let's help them get it right.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, this is our future protected intersections, which we love, but they're a challenge.
And we don't know actually who's going to plow the snow on the Amazon sidewalks or the Amazon bike lanes.
I think they can afford to.
Well, if they do global warming, maybe they won't have to.
Here we go. All right, it's 9:03. So just wanted to say huge thanks to Leah. It's been wonderful working together, and I happen to know what you're about to do, and it's incredibly exciting. So I hope we'll stay in touch. But thank you for your hard work as liaison to BAC. It's we're sorry to see you go, but we're at least we're in good hands with Ellen. Thank you.
And if I can get the chat and the recording when it's available, and a record of who has been here, that would be helpful. Thank you. Oh, crazy.
Yes, on that, I think there will be 3 download files. If Leah grabs the chat, the recording and the transcript are separate files, their own. So it'll be 3
Great.
downloads.
Great. Thank you. Look forward to the real recording as well. Thank you. And thank you for agreeing to have a joint meeting and discussing Route 1 once more, which will continue until next year.
All right, 9:05. I guess we better jump. Many thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.